everyone, and welcome to one of our knowledge transfer sessions. Today we're going to talk about the concept of fixed annuities, specifically something called a multi-year guaranteed annuity. Something I think people are still a little afraid of because of the word annuity in the name, but I think once you kind of look at it, it's something you should consider, at least some of us should, basically. Once again, today's information has to be treated as general in nature. Whenever I talk about any financial solution, product, investment idea, tax strategy, everyone's situation can be different. There's more than one way to look at things in the financial services industry. So today we're trying to keep today's presentation as general information specifically. A little bit about myself. I have more than 18 years experience in the financial services industry. I'm held to the fiduciary standard as a financial planner, and for about 8-ish years of my career, I worked inside an insurance company. So, I've done both the drinking of the Kool-Aid about insurance products as well as the drinking of the Kool-Aid hating insurance products. And so, I kind of have this nuanced view about this. At least I think it's somewhat of a nuanced view that I think would be helpful for people. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the concept of the fixed deferred annuity. And then we're going to talk about the basics of the interest rate guarantee. What are we talking about here? And then we're going to talk about the idea of surrender charges and market value adjustment, kind of the big negatives about annuities. Then we're going to talk about the free withdrawal riders, probably the most important piece to have on these types of annuities. And then kind of close it out with a hopefully well-rounded discussion of is this a good idea or not. So kicking it off, let's talk about what is a fixed deferred annuity. And one of the things we always got to remember, we talk about the word annuity, the word is meaningless. It is such a broad word describing so many different types of contracts. And I made a video on this. The word annuity is meaningless. So today we're talking about the concept of a fixed annuity, really a multi-year guaranteed annuity. And so this is under the deferred annuity category. And that's what we're talking about today. And when we talk about deferred annuities, or this concept of it, most of the things you're going to read about online are going to talk about annuities used for income, and that can be a purpose they're used for. But when we talk about the rise of annuities in the United States, a lot of it happened around the time of the Great Depression, where banks were failing, and people were starting using annuity contracts as more of savings vehicles, as opposed to, say, pension plans or income-producing vehicles. And so when we talk about this concept of the fixed deferred annuity, one of the basic problems we have to talk about here, just real briefly, is that the word fixed is in the name, and fixed means a lot of different categories of annuities. When I said the word annuity is meaningless. And so because there's so many different types of annuities that can be considered fixed, or even fixed deferred, what I usually suggest is what we're talking about today is MYGAs, multi-year guaranteed annuity. If you went to any professional in the financial services industry who actually understands annuities, and that's a big definition or difference there. Multi-year guaranteed annuity is a term you could use and everyone basically knows exactly what you're talking about, or MYGA. And so let's give an example of a MYGA, a basic problem we run into with this. It looks like a CD, but it's not. And so one of the basic problems, if I was trying to explain this to you as simply as possible, I would say a MYGA is like a 5-year CD that pays 5% per year. So every year you make 5%. And at the end of it, you can walk away with your money. And that's mostly true. That entire statement's mostly true, except for the part where I said CD. Because it's like a CD. It looks very similar. It's a structured product. But it's guaranteed by the claims paying ability of the insurance company. Whereas CDs nowadays typically are FDIC insured. And then part 2 of that is that CDs tend not to have the surrender charges that annuities have. When you break your CD early, it's nowhere near as painful as annuities because of the surrender charges. So, saying it's like a CD is only partially true. For what most people think about, like how I make interest and how long I have to lock up my money for, very similar. But some of the other details are a little murkier. And so we got to talk about this basics of the interest rate guarantee because we're talking about this fixed deferred annuity, or MYGA. MYGA stands for multi-year guaranteed annuity, which means you're guaranteeing your interest for a period of time, 2 years, 3 years, things of that nature. And so when you look at these products, or when you look at fixed annuities in general, we have really 2 major types we're going to talk about: the declared rate annuity and the multi-year guarantee annuity. The declared rate annuity is every year the interest rate changes and you have a guaranteed minimum rate. And so in this example here, I have a 5-year bonus product. 5 years means you're going to have a 5-year surrender schedule. That means if you surrendered early, it's going to be painful. And then year 1, you'll make 7.5% interest. And the reason I use this one here is I kind of showing the bait and switch here because I don't like declared rate annuities because of this problem right here. So the declared rate in this example is 4%. That's what someone makes on, say, year 2 potentially. Then they're going to give you a bonus rate of 3.5%. So instead of you getting 4% year 1, you're getting 7.5% year 1. And it looks really attractive, right? 7.5% fixed is a very attractive rate for most people. But then what happens after year 1 is you no longer have your bonus, and the declared rate can be any number above 3%. And when I worked for an insurance company, I had the chief financial officer. We asked him one time, how often are the rates above the minimum? And she said almost never at that time. And that was me working inside an insurance company. And having followed these products for a very long time, sometimes the declared rate is higher than the minimum guarantee, but a lot of times it's just the minimum guarantee. Now, a 5-year multi-year guarantee product with the exact same rate guarantee period is much simpler. You have a 5-year product, you make 5% a year, no bonuses, no declared rate, just 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, right? And it has a secondary really kind of important point here that it actually is going to make you more money than the product that year 1 had a 7.5% declared rate with bonus. And so I really don't like these other products, the declared rate products. I really like the multi-year guarantee solution if you decide to go this route. Now, if you're trying to kind of compare all these different options, if you're an annuity nerd, and I think this is really more for annuity nerds than for the general public, because it's hard for you to get the information. Yield to surrender is what you're looking for because that kind of that is a number that will show you across all these different products who has the highest interest rate. Now, when we talk about the interest rates, duration or how long you're going to keep the product for usually directly relates to the interest you get, but not always. So like a 3-year product will have a rate that will typically be lower than a 5-year product, that will typically be lower than a 7-year product, that will typically be lower than a 10-year product. Okay, and actually within these durations, you're going to find that there's a couple that are really competitive that tend to have the highest rate. So like the 5-year, there are lots and lots of companies that offer 5-year fixed multi-year guaranteed annuities. And so even I got to start saying MYGAs. And because there's a lot of competition around the 5-year product, the interest rates tend to be much higher for the 5-year than for other durations, basically. So even though the longer you hold it, typically the higher the rate you get is, sometimes that's not always true, and you can even see in this example right here. And then the other thing I've always noticed is that the really long durations, like 10-year products, they don't actually have that much higher rate than the 5-year products. So because of that, I usually suggest people look at the 5 years right now, but this does change as interest rates change. You don't lock in the rate till you buy the product. The other thing to look at is company ratings. Company ratings, once again, can affect the interest rate. And what I did here is I just went online and found some just kind of top rates for these rate bands, just to show the example here that on a 3-year rate guarantee, the A+ company actually has the best rate. This happens. So in this example, you'd probably want the top rate because it's also the strongest company or insurance company. And these products are based upon the claims paying ability of the insurance company. And then on the 5-year product here, you'll notice that the company that has the worst ratings tend to have the best rates, 5.45% versus 5.4%. You will, though, notice that generally speaking, you can get really decently rated insurance companies with pretty much the same rates for these multi-year guaranteed annuities. The problem that runs into it, when we talk about ratings and all this stuff, is when you go to comparison shop, you usually go to your trusted source, which is great. But your trusted source may not have access to the full breadth of companies in the full interest rate spectrum. So what usually happens is they're more stratified. You might get the A+ company at 3.5% and the A minus company at 5% because they just don't have all these other options. But a lot of factors can affect this interest rate that I was showing on the screens right here. And so if you focus on yield to surrender and your multi-year guarantee, you kind of get this sense of how this works. How much you deposit tends to matter. These are retirement products, so typically we're talking $100,000 deposits. Not always, but that's usually where the best rates are. You want to look at your surrender schedule because this really affects the rate. This term called market value adjustment, which we're going to talk about next. Any riders you add can affect the rates. Company ratings, as I mentioned, timing, just if you buy an annuity today versus tomorrow, rates could be different when you go to buy it. Interesting thing is commissions don't usually affect the interest rate. It's paid behind the scenes in most of these contracts. Now, sometimes some of these products have lower commissions, which means they have higher rates. But if you just focus on getting the best rate, the commission doesn't really matter because it's not part of the deal. It's paid behind the scenes to an insurance agent like me. The other thing about the interest is we got to talk about the taxation of this. So this is a tax-deferred product. And tax deferral is actually pretty important because tax deferral, what it can mean is that retirees tend to have peaks and valleys around their tax situation. And if you're trying to qualify for certain government benefits, depending upon their calculation methods, if you're trying to take advantage of tax bracket planning, do Roth conversions, anything where you want to control your taxes, right? Having something where you can earn interest that is tax deferred can be valuable. Not always. That you have to actually be doing the planning typically for this to be valuable, but it is tax deferred if we're talking about non-qualified or just cash money deposits. When you take money out of these products, it's last in, first out. So if it paid interest, that's going to be the first thing that comes out, meaning it's taxable. These are income taxable at death, so you don't get the step-up in basis. So like if you own stock or properties or anything else that gets the step-up in basis, annuities don't get the step-up in basis. Your heirs have to pay the tax on the interest on these products. Not necessarily the deposit. It depends upon the source of the deposit, but the interest for sure. These are really retiree products. If you withdraw interest on these products before age 59 and a half, you do pay a 10% tax penalty on the interest. Now, if you do the math on the interest with a 10% tax penalty, it can still beat other products, but it does make it less desirable, actually. So let's talk about the big negative here, right? So this is, once again, pretty simple. You buy a product, you get an interest rate for a certain period of years, and when you're done with it, you figure out what you want to do with the money. You could take it out. You could what's called 1035 exchange it to a new annuity. Anything you want to do within that. But this is kind of the big negative when we talk about annuities, is this idea of surrender charges and market value adjustments. Surrender charges. So when I said this is a 5-year product, a 4-year product, once again, one of these industry terms that most people will understand. If I said MYGA 4, everyone generally in the industry understands, okay, that's a 4-year product, it's a 4-year surrender schedule, and it's going to look something like this, 9876. So if you take the money out in year 2 and you take out all the money, you're going to pay an 8% surrender charge. And that's what I mean that this doesn't necessarily it has some big difference with the CD. This is one of those bigger differences because the surrender charges on annuities are just fundamentally higher than they are against, say, a CD, basically. And so this is one of the big negatives, right? You have to navigate this forever. Before I can even suggest this to someone as a potential avenue, this is one of the things I have to navigate for you. The other thing is that, and this happened when interest rates really crashed after 2008. So in 2008, we have a massive market crash. One of the other things that also happened, and I would argue this is in some ways more significant, we lowered interest rates, and interest rates went to near zero in this country. And what happened because annuities are fundamentally fixed income products, when interest rates went down, it created a big problem because insurance companies just couldn't give very much interest, and they definitely couldn't pay commission or distribution costs. They couldn't pay their employees, so they had to go, well, how can we make these products as lean as possible for us so that we can give more interest? And they created a second surrender charge. So on the previous screen, let me go back. You have to navigate this. But then what they can do is, if interest rates are rising or lowering, they can add a secondary surrender on this. Because what insurance company, to build an annuity, what they're doing is they're buying things like treasuries, bonds. They have some more exotic investments in there, but they're almost always fixed income. And if they have to sell those fixed income as a loss, they're going to pass it on to you. And if they're going to sell those fixed income as a gain, they're usually going to pass that on to you. Not every company does. So this is the other big one to watch out for. So if I was to simplify the surrender period, if you're going to buy a 5-year product, paying 5%, it's pretty locked in. You don't want to break it because it's going to be painful, basically. You could lose easily 10% of the value by breaking this early. What makes this actually a really good solution? A good solution for some people. I always hate, I'm a financial product nerd. I like almost everything in the financial services industry. I like everything from exotic structured investments to annuities to just standard index funds. I kind of like it all. What makes this really good, in my opinion, is this free withdrawal rider. And let me explain why. So one of the problems I always run into, you're going to run into, is let's say you buy an index fund. And it's great. You have all the history of it. You can read all the articles. I'm going to buy an S&P 500 index fund. And that's a great solution for a lot of your money. But then you want to diversify against that. You want a non-correlating asset. And that's where it becomes challenging because you're going to, well, do I buy bonds? Do I ladder CDs? Do I use money market accounts? You have all these different areas you can do. But one of the core issues with that, especially if you're a retiree, is when the market crashes, you want to be able to get at that non-correlating asset. You want to be able to spend it. And the problem with, say, a CD, like if you buy a 5-year CD, you have to break it and you lose interest if you want to get at that money. If you have a brokered CD, you have to sell on the secondary market and potentially take losses, depending upon what's happening there. And so you have to get at your money. And annuities have this thing called a free withdrawal rider, where you're able to take out a chunk of the contract, is usually 10%, and not worry about any of those penalties. And this is important because if you put in, say, $150,000, well, that means you can take out roughly $15,000 while the rest of the market's crashing. And you actually have a non-correlating asset that's making a guaranteed by the insurance company interest rate. And that makes this usable then, because if this was just a pure point-to-point, 5 years, you just get your interest rate, that does grow your money. Like, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but really you want to be able to get your money when the market's crashing, and if you're using this as a true market hedge. And the ability to get 10% out is really what lets you do this. So I would suggest that this is the rider that you want if you're ever doing a multi-year guarantee annuity, is some version of this. And you should know exactly what this is, because some contracts that pay the highest interest, they might give you only 5% or interest-only withdrawal privileges. And I think that's a little too low. There's some math on this behind the scenes, but like if I'm trying to blend index funds with, say, an annuity like this, I want to be able to get enough money out of the annuity that I can cover needs while I'm letting everything else recover. And I find that 5% almost never mathematically works for me. Some additional provisions on here, or just additional concepts. Typically, these will have disability and terminal illness waivers. The disability waiver is a little weird or a little frustrating because you usually need to have some type of confinement to get it, meaning you're going to a nursing home or something of that nature. But if you are terminally ill and a doctor will sign off on a document, there's no surrender charges. You can get your money out plus the interest, typically. And then if you die, you get the accumulation value. You don't have to worry about the surrender charges or market value adjustment. You get your accumulation value minus withdrawal. So all the interest, your deposit, things of that nature. So is this a good idea? And you know, it's interesting. If you listen to my video, you probably go, well, I really like annuities. And I do. But I only suggest it some of the time on the other side of the equation. And so this concept of is it a good idea? It really comes down to, you know, a lot of basic problems here. It's not perfect. You are locking up your money for a period of time, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I don't like much more than 5 years on these products specifically. You need to be able to deposit $100,000 to really make these things. You can do lesser amounts like $50,000. but you tend to get less choice, or 0.2% less interest depending upon the product. So they kind of gatekeeps these products a little bit. You could beat, like I said, 5 years, 5% as an example. Depending on your investing capabilities and your risk tolerance, that is beatable by lots of other solutions. You might have to take risk. You might have to do certain assumptions. You might be more of a probability-based investor, but you could beat that. I think that's very fair. You are locking your interest rate for a period of time. And so think about that 5% number. You're locking that up for 5 years. If interest rates are 7% next year, for the next 5 years, you're only making 5. If interest rates are 3% next year, for the next 5 years, you're making 5, right? So you see the difference there? You don't exactly know what the future is going to hold, but you are making a little bit of a bet there. And then the last thing you typically have to interact with an insurance agent if you buy a multi-year guaranteed annuity. And this is an interesting problem because insurance agents don't always like these products. And part of the reason is they tend to pay lower commission, which can really bother an insurance agent's bottom line. But you do have to interact with an insurance agent typically to buy these products. They're not just easily publicly available. Now, you can buy them at places like Fidelity or Vanguard. They do have their what we call an annuity sales desk, where they're insurance agent light. They don't have a lot of products, but they do. They can more transactionally do these products for you. But the thing about this, when we talk about would I do this or not, or why do I suggest this, is the alternatives are also not perfect, right? So in the retirement services industry, there's no perfect investment. There's great investments, but no perfect investment. There's always trade-offs, right? And so when we talk about just standard retirement planning, and this is your standard more 60-40 stock bond split, where I took a 20-25 fund and I just broke it down, you're going to have to see that 25% of your money is in something earning 2.41%. It's liquid, reasonably so. There might be situations in the future where it can earn more than this, but based upon the last 10 years, this earned 2.41%. You can beat this with lots of solutions, actually. I mean, this is one of the big things that the financial services industry does, is kind of fix this problem right now. But if you just go by a standard, more, say, robo-advised style, the alternatives aren't perfect. Like, I would argue a fixed annuity is absolutely beating this in this example, but materially so. And there's some other things you can do right now, like the rise of money market funds is been really great for the past couple of years. I actually really like money market funds. Remember, financial services nerd, I like it all, but I really do. And so the thing about money market funds is they do what everyone loves. You never want to lock up your money. You want to make really good rates of interest with no risk, right? And that's kind of what a money market fund mostly does. They're not FDIC insured. You need a money market account for that. Remember that. But the thing about this is that if interest rates go down in the future, this craters immediately. Like, these are typically quoted on 7-day yields. The interest rates can generally be lowered at any time. And so you don't get to lock in your rates unless you lock in the rate. And then I went to Schwab's trading desk, and I just wanted to look at, if I wanted to buy 5-year duration products, and let's say I have one thing that's 5%, and I wanted to blend any sort of fixed income solution. Right now, this is not everything that's out there, but right now, a general subset of the general investment choices, you're going to see things like this, rates like this, and you can't. This is an offer to buy any of these things specifically, but you'll notice, like, when I looked at an annuity paying 5 or 5.4%, and then I have, treasuries are paying 3.8 in the 5-year duration, a non-callable CD is at 4.3, a AAA munis at 3.9. I'm having trouble beating even factoring taxes. I'm having trouble beating the annuity interest rate, and so. And all these things have the exact same problem of the annuity has of the market value adjustment. If interest rates are going down, these are going to all go in value, and you get positive market value adjustment, if I'm using the annuity term here. And vice versa. If interest rates are going up, these are going to go down in value. So all these technically fluctuate before their maturity if you sell them early. And so when we talk about this, when we do videos like this, we're trying to go, well, here's information, here's things you should consider. This is a tool. We prefer process to tools. We prefer the entire financial planning process. I talked to someone today about this, that you should do a process, because this may not be the best option for you. You should look at well-rounded options. There are more options than just this out here. But then again, I would argue, because annuities in the name, a lot of people will ignore the simple, easy MYGA, because annuities in the name, and it is a pretty simple product that's not that bad. Commissions on these tend to also be lower than other insurance products. Sometimes I laugh because I do both sides of the equation. I'm not a fee-only planner. I sell annuities for commissions, but I also can do fee-only financial planning and for fee for advice. And I almost always make more money than a MYGA when I'm doing those other plans. Because MYGA commissions tend to be just lower than other types of products. So even though I don't like the sales process on annuities a lot, and I think there are definite problems with the annuity industry, I think it's always been somewhat self-serving for the rest of the financial planning industry to talk about the conflicts of interest around annuities, but not talk about the conflict of interest around their own fees, and that this product actually may pay materially less to an advisor than their own fee schedule. Another thing here is that this is one transaction potentially that does one thing, and there could be a benefit as people get older or around your retirement plan to just doing a single transaction as opposed to trying to ladder or blend something, because behind the scenes the insurance company is technically doing those blending on your behalf. Tax deferral here is pretty valuable if you're trying to do tax bracket planning, but not in every situation. And then the other thing, I kind of mentioned this earlier, especially if you go the Fidelity route, which is a good option, is that just doing some basic shopping on this can really save you thousands of dollars on interest by going out there and looking at this from a brokerage concept. So I hope this is helpful. I hope it gave good broad-based education and was truly well-rounded as opposed to the more traditional annuity sales pitch. This is one I like, but it's not for everyone. If you ever have any questions, I'm based in Washington State, but if you have any questions or just follow-up, I love chatting with people. We talk to people all the time, not for a sale, but just to kind of chat, so feel free to bug us. And then we are, of course, for hire for our financial planning services. Thank you.